What is it that you want? You want a long-term stable relationship or not? People think, well, they lived happily ever after. It's like, that's not what you want in a marriage. Maybe it's so difficult to establish a long-term relationship.
I love her! I love her with every breath I breathe!
People are having a harder time finding, let's call them, more permanent relationship. And that keeps people tied to each other and updated.
Choosing the person that you want to share your life with is one of the most important decisions any of us makes.
Here's the key to a good relationship. It's not the only one, but watch your person carefully, carefully, carefully. And whenever they do something that you would like them to do more of, tell them that that was really good. And mean it. And it's not manipulative, because if it's manipulative, it won't work. It's like you have to say, wow, I'm so glad you did that. And you have to be precise. Here's what you just did that I thought was great. Reward is intensely useful in terms of modifying behavior. But the problem is that it's really hard to notice when things are going right. Right? Because you're kind of primed to notice when things are going wrong. And so you use threat and punishment more often as agents of shaping the people that you're around. Because, you know, when everything's going right, it's like, what are you going to say? Everything's going right. It turns to zero. You just assume it. And that's not good. That's not good. You want to pay attention. If you want to rectify your relationships with them, and I'm not saying to do this in a manipulative way, it won't work. But if they do something that's promoting harmony and peace and goodwill, it's like, tend to it, tell them that you noticed. It's like, it's so useful. And you have to get rid of your grudges and your resentment to do that. You are much happier with the people around you when they behave in accordance with reasonable social norms. And then you actually feel genuinely connected to them. And you want to work on their behalf so that everything works out. You have someone to, well, it's like two ropes that are tangled together. It's stronger, especially during times of weakness. And you have two brains instead of one. And that actually turns out to be really helpful when things are complicated. And it builds a solidity into your life and a reality into your life to have someone who's along with you on this very long voyage. And so I think that deepens your life in a way that isn't really possible with fragmentary relationships as a single person. And then there's more to it than that. It's, you know, part of the reason for a relationship is sexual contact, obviously. Well, you don't necessarily need a relationship for that. But that's not the reason to be with someone. The reason to be with someone when there's a lot of them, and it's genuine. You know, that's why marriage is a sacrament in most human communities, right? It's stamped both by the state and by the sacred authorities, because it's not just a physiological union. That's what animals do. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with the physiological union, but it has to be placed in the context of everything else a human being is. And I do think it's dreadful for people not to have that. It is hard although, you know, it's easier to meet people because there's more ways of meeting them.
Right.
But the ways of meeting them are more shallow. In my clinical practice, I would say that the rise of the internet dating, we don't want to underestimate how radical a technology that is. That's especially for men. I think that people are having a harder time finding, like, let's call them more permanent relationships, is because it's become increasingly easy to have fleeting, casual, sexual relationships. I mean, Tinder is a revolution, right? It's a revolution in sexual behavior. Being good for people who are looking for a partner. Now, there is some speculation and some evidence that it lowers the transaction price of separation and divorce. You know, because one of the reasons you don't separate or you don't get divorced is like, well, you're going to find someone else. And if it's easier to find someone else, then perhaps you're more tempted to sever the relationship. So maybe you lose in one place where you gain in the other. But, well, the first thing is to decide if that is really what you want. You want a long-term stable relationship or not? And if that's the goal, then your behavior should be devoted to whatever it is that facilitates that goal. And I certainly don't see that casual and impulsive sex fits that bill, not in the least. And all of the evidence with regards to living together shows that that's actually detrimental to the establishment of a long-term relationship. So, first of all, common law marriage, people who are in a common law marriage are much more likely to be divorced. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, people who live together before they get married are much more likely to be divorced after they get married. So the idea that, well, you can try someone on for size and see how it works, and then you're going to see if you're compatible. It's like, that's one story. Another story is, well, how about you and I live together for a little while, and if you're not so bad, but maybe I can find someone better, and if I do, in the next year and a half or so, because we're not hooked together in any formal way, I can just trade you in. It's okay, you can do the same to me. But I don't really see that as the sort of complementary mutual interaction that leads to the formulation of long-term trust. And I think it's a better story for interpreting what constitutes living together than, well, we're going to try each other out because that's what mature people would do. Most importantly, the data indicate that it doesn't work, is that you're more likely to get divorced, not less likely. Because maybe the right attitude is, well, you're probably about as flawed as me, and we're lucky that we found each other, and so let's see if we can make a commitment because we're engaging in something that's very risky, an intimate relationship, and we're going to commit to each other and see if we can build something of value across time. And there's a definite risk in that, but there's a compliment to your partner. It's like, well, I think you're worth making a sacrifice for. And what's the sacrifice? Well, it's everyone else. It's a big sacrifice. And if you don't see that as a compliment, then I don't think you're thinking, because not only is it a compliment, it's sort of like the ultimate compliment. And maybe you don't get to have a marriage that works without that compliment. Maybe it's so difficult to establish a long-term relationship that's functional that you have to make a walloping sacrifice very early on in the relationship in order for that to even be a possibility. And maybe not, because what the hell do we know about what binds people together? But it's not that easy to stay with someone for a long period of time. It's a real commitment. It takes a tremendous amount of effort. The effort issue is like, well, when you're in love with someone, you're going to organize your schedule and make them a priority. And, that's in some ways a fleeting state, although it's not necessarily as fleeting as people think it is, but whatever. It's obviously a priority. And then you get married and, you kind of get accustomed to having each other around, and then everything else is more important and the relationship drifts to the bottom. And then people get dissatisfied and they start looking for excitement and adventure otherwise. Well, you can't do that. You have to prioritize the relationship. Like, my observation clinically has been, for a couple to maintain their relationship without it deteriorating, they have to spend 90 minutes a week together talking about their lives, about how the house is run, about what they've all been doing, to keep their stories caught up, right? But I think of marriage the same way. Like, people think, well, they lived happily ever after. It's like, that's not what you want in a marriage. Yeah. You want someone to contend with, because you learn through that wrestling. You learn where you're an idiot and where you should stop being, and vice versa. Yeah. So that's the spiritual aspect of marriage. It's the fact that you have to contend with someone under all sorts of circumstances. Theoretically, is what would you say? It's a manner of promoting psychological, or you could say spiritual growth. And then they need to spend at least one time having a date, and 2 is better. 1 is necessary, 2 is better. You can't aim for a lot more than that, because life is very busy, and if it's going to be sustainable, it has to be realistic. But they need to make time for each other twice a week and talk in a non-romantic way, just practically about the domestic economy and about everything that's going on. And that keeps people tied to each other and updated. And so that's sort of your minimal commitment level if you don't want things to deteriorate. Often young people are afraid of commitment, for example, in the context of a romantic relationship, and because they feel that that's going to interfere with their pursuit of something more valuable. But that's just not the case. You're not going to find something more valuable in your life than a committed relationship with someone that you love, that sustains itself across time, and that in all likelihood produces children. That's life. And there may be people for whom avoiding that is the better route, but those people are very rare, and you need a real reason to assume that you're one of those people. And hopefully for you, you're not. I've had a very good career, a very meaningful career in multiple dimensions, and it's still been the case for me that the most important part of my life has been my intimate relationship with my wife and my family.